crime is in the news so much these days, it is easy to start to think that the only big political scandals are those involving crimes or alleged crimes. But as President Trump attends this G20 summit in Argentina tonight, and here he was near Vladimir Putin after they announced they wouldn't meet, consider that even if Trump's lies about doing business in Moscow are not proven to be crimes, they are still a massive scandal implicating U.S. national security, with Kremlin veterans shepherding Trump's aides on the deal, as the New York Times reports today, and Russia and Trump coordinating their false cover story. So right now, let's dig into the national security of it. I'm joined by retired Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters. And Colonel, I want to share with you a colleague of mine's breakdown of this, Rachel Maddow, explaining why this is a huge problem for the U.S., regardless of the legal piece of it.
What we now know, that Mueller knows, is that the president, during the campaign in 2016, he was secretly trying to arrange what would probably have been the largest business deal of his life in Russia, through direct contact with the Kremlin. He was trying to do this business deal while the Kremlin was orchestrating a military intelligence attack by the GRU on our election to help Trump win.
You hear that description of it?
Yes.
Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that it all proves to be legal. What are the national security implications in your view?
Well, first of all, I'm the wrong guy to ask because I believe that treason is illegal. And to me, this is treason. And, you know, Ari, short of nuclear war, general war, I can't imagine a more serious national security threat than a U.S. president who is compromised, or a candidate for the presidency, compromised by the most hostile foreign power we face. Now, all of that said, if there's ever a film made about the Trump administration, it's got to be done by the Coen brothers, because this is going into the realms of the absurd. Today was the first time I actually laughed out loud, literally, over this whole mess, when I found that the Trump gang was trying to work this deal in Moscow through a Russian spy general named Shmukov. General Shmukov. I mean, shades of Dr. Strangelove and Premier Kissoff. But on a this is how you do things in Russia. And they were clearly trying every track. And I think it's because Trump's ego got so involved in this Moscow project. It became his great white whale. You know, he'd be able to buy or seduce his way from Scotland to Atlantic City and back again, but he couldn't crack Moscow.
Well, you're saying that this is like a Coen Brothers movie and that it tied it all together. This tower was so central. I'm wondering if then whether Trump Tower Moscow is the rug in Big Lebowski, which really tied the room together.
Oh, that's an insult to a very nice rug. I mean, come on, the dude knew what he's talking about with rugs.
The dude knew, yeah.
Yeah, he did. But I think it is. I mean, he seems to have become truly obsessed
fixated
with getting a Trump Tower in Moscow. And to that end, he lost perspective. Because one thing he'd always had through all his bankruptcies, he had some perspective on what made sense business-wise. It was at the point, it appears, that Trump Tower Moscow wasn't even making good business sense, but he had to have it. This was a femme fatale he could not capture, or might prefer, the great white whale he could not find.
Well, you're referring to the potential erotic overtones of this skyscraper.
Yeah.
And there are these people who become obsessed with having the tallest building, and I don't know where that comes from. It's not necessarily more profitable just because it's taller. We'll leave that for people to consider.
It suggests an inadequacy to me.
To you, an inadequacy.
Yeah.
Well, that you see in the potentially manifesting.
Yeah.
I want to play for your analysis Donald Trump in 2016, because one of the problems with this is now all of these lies, even when exposed, they still played a role in getting him where he wanted to go at the time.
Yeah.
And so now we can look back with more clarity, knowing what we know tonight, that he was actively pursuing this deal, that he was directly involved in it, that Michael Cohen was talking to the Kremlin about it, that Ivanka Trump was talking about picking the architect. And here's Donald Trump on the campaign trail, and here's him praising Putin as he seeks Kremlin help.
He's running his country, and at least he's a leader, you know, unlike what we have in this country.
Putin comes out, he said, Donald Trump is brilliant, he's doing an amazing job, and he's leading the pack. Okay, that's nice.
Putin says very nice things about me. I think that's very nice. It has no effect on me other than I think it's very nice. If we can get along with Russia, that's very good.
Was he speaking for American interests as a candidate who wanted to run this country then, or was he speaking for his secret personal interests?
Well, he's certainly speaking for his personal interests. But there are two groups of Trump supporters that continue to bewilder me. One is the fundamentalist Christians who follow this false messiah, but we'll set them aside for the moment. What about all the red cap people, the people who are professed patriots, who believe that Donald Trump is a patriot? Ari, can your viewers really believe, can any of them believe that Donald Trump really puts this country first? You know, I go back to a line Grace Slick sang in her song Rejoiced after bathing at Baxter's. She sang, "I'd rather have my country die for me." To me, that is Donald Trump. I personally do not believe he would sacrifice his life to save the lives of 330 million Americans. He'd put himself first. I think he'd put himself before his wife. This is a man who has no value system, who lives totally in the moment. He's infantile. It's about immediate satisfaction. And so the Americans who have deluded themselves that this man who is trying desperately to collude with the Russians, not always succeeding, but doing his best to collude, who worships dictators and murderers and thugs, that this man is a patriot, I'm sorry, I don't buy it.
It means a lot coming from you as someone who has taken those risks. It also speaks to his canny strategy, because this is a man who's used the word nationalism to try to get people to criticize him on the idea that he puts America to first, when in fact, as you've just exposed, that wasn't what he was doing during the campaign with what we've learned. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.